My best friend Lucas and I always loved a good adventure. We were both 25 years old and had an insatiable thirst for adrenaline. When we heard about a distant forest surrounded by rumors of being haunted, we knew we had to go there. The forest was several hours away from our city, an isolated place perfect for camping. The stories about spirits and a witch living in a house in the middle of the forest only made the trip more attractive to us. We decided to prepare meticulously, bringing everything we needed to spend a few days in the wilderness. On the morning of our departure, the weather was perfect, and our backpacks were loaded with supplies, flashlights, and camping gear. As we entered the forest, we were immediately enveloped by a sense of mystery. The tall, dense trees blocked the sunlight, creating a dark and silent environment. We set up our tent in a small clearing where the sunlight still managed to penetrate, creating a less oppressive atmosphere. While setting up camp, Lucas started recounting some of the stories we had heard about the place: missing people, sightings of spirits wandering among the trees, and of course, the legend of the witch who supposedly lived in an abandoned house in the heart of the forest. Despite the scary stories, we were excited. Night fell quickly, and the forest around us became even more silent. We lit a campfire and sat around it, enjoying the warmth and comforting light while discussing our plans for the next day. We were ready to explore every corner of that forest and find out if there was any truth to the rumors. The silence of the night was interrupted only by the distant sounds of nocturnal animals. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves of the trees and creating shadows that danced around us. I looked at Lucas, and he was as eager as I was. Little did we know that this would be the last time we felt safe in that forest. We could hardly wait to see what the first night had in store for us. Darkness enveloped the forest almost completely, with only the faint light of the moon managing to penetrate the dense canopy of trees. The night breeze was cold and biting, making our campfire flicker and cast restless shadows around us. The environment was silent, almost oppressively calm, with only the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of a nocturnal bird breaking the stillness. As we sat around the fire, Lucas and I began to feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the cold or the strangely moving shadows. There was something else, something that seemed to be watching us. That's when we started hearing the first strange sounds. At first, they were almost imperceptible whispers, as if the wind was trying to tell us something. Lucas was the first to notice. He lifted his head, frowning, and asked if I was hearing it too. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, echoing among the trees, but never becoming clear enough for us to understand what they were saying. Soon after, the whispers were accompanied by light footsteps, as if someone was carefully walking through the forest. The sound was irregular, sometimes distant, sometimes so close that I felt tempted to shine my flashlight in that direction. But there was nothing, just the impenetrable darkness. "Let's see what this is," Lucas suggested, with curiosity overcoming the fear in his voice. I hesitated for a moment, but the urge to uncover the mystery won out. We grabbed our flashlights and with one last look at the crackling fire, ventured into the forest. As we moved away from the camp, the sounds became clearer. The whispers turned into voices, still indistinct, but now they seemed to be trying to warn us. The trees around us seemed to close in, creating a narrow, claustrophobic corridor. Every step we took was accompanied by the sound of branches breaking under our feet and the constant murmuring of the voices. I could feel my heart beating faster, and every time I looked at Lucas, I saw that he was just as apprehensive as I was. But neither of us wanted to turn back. We pressed on, determined to discover the source of those disturbing sounds. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a clearing where the moonlight shone more brightly. In the middle of it stood an old wooden house, partially hidden by creeping plants and shrubs. The structure was in ruins, with broken windows and doors hanging from their hinges. We looked at each other, knowing we had found something important and possibly dangerous, but it was too late to turn back. With renewed courage, we approached the house, ready to face whatever was waiting for us inside. We followed the voices through the forest, which seemed to call us louder and louder. Each step made the air feel denser and heavier. The tall, dark trees closed in around us, blocking almost all the moonlight. I held my flashlight tightly, the beam shaking with the tremor of my hand. Lucas was beside me, his wide eyes reflecting the same fear I felt. The trail led us to a clearing where the moonlight finally managed to penetrate the oppressive darkness. In the center of the clearing, we saw the silhouette of an old wooden house. The sight of the house, with its broken windows and hanging doors, made my heart race. It was as if we were facing something straight out of a nightmare. "Is this it?" Lucas whispered, his voice trembling slightly. I just nodded, unable to find words. We knew we were in the right place. The voices seemed to originate from there, and the feeling of being watched grew even stronger. Despite the fear surrounding us, we decided to go in. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, and took the first step toward the house. The wood creaked under our feet, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the night. When we reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity and the need to uncover the truth pushed us forward. Inside the house, the air was even colder, filled with a damp, musty smell. The darkness was almost total, except for the beam of light from my flashlight cutting through the blackness like a knife. The interior was in ruins, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs hanging in every corner. Everything seemed frozen in time. Then we heard a different sound, the dragging of feet coming from one of the rooms. My heart raced, and I exchanged an alarmed look with Lucas. Without thinking, we moved toward the sound, curiosity and fear vying for control of our movements. Turning the corner, we came face to face with a terrifying sight. In the middle of the room stood a grotesque figure. It was a woman, or what was left of her. Her skin was pale and withered, and her eyes shone with deep hatred. Her clothes were tattered and dirty, and her disheveled hair fell over her face. "Who dares to enter my house?" Her voice was a cold whisper, full of malice. Lucas took a step back, and I felt panic rise in my throat. The witch extended her hand toward us, and that was enough to break our trance. "Run!" I shouted, and we sprinted down the hallway, back toward the entrance. We could hear her footsteps behind us, getting closer and closer. We burst out of the house and ran into the forest, our feet barely touching the ground as we struggled to escape that nightmare. The forest, which had once felt oppressive, was now our only refuge. We ran without looking back, branches scratching us and the cold air cutting our lungs. We didn't know where we were going, only that we needed to flee, but the feeling of being chased never left us. We were lost in the darkness of the forest, unsure if we would ever find our way back. But one thing was certain, that night would change our lives forever. We ran through the forest as if our lives depended on it, which they did. The sound of the witch's footsteps echoed behind us, getting closer. Fear gave me an energy I didn't know I had. Lucas ran beside me, his labored breathing the only sound besides the frantic noise of our steps. The forest darkness was nearly total. The flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead, and we constantly stumbled over roots and rocks. The trees closed in around us, creating an oppressive maze. Every shadow seemed to hide a new danger. Every noise was a warning that the witch was closer. At some point, we realized we were completely lost. The familiar trails had vanished, and desperation began to set in. The adrenaline that once fueled us now gave way to exhaustion and panic. We stopped for a moment to catch our breath, but the unsettling silence of the forest was broken only by the sound of the witch's footsteps. We need to find a place to hide," Lucas said, his voice trembling. I nodded, frantically looking around for anything that could provide shelter. That's when we saw the entrance to a cave, partially hidden by low vegetation. Without a second thought, we ran towards it. The opening was narrow, and we had to squeeze through. Once inside, the darkness was almost complete, but the feeling of being out of the witch's reach gave us brief relief. The cave was cold and damp, with a floor covered in pebbles and mud. Our flashlights cast long, eerie shadows on the rocky walls. As we explored deeper, the air grew heavier and the silence more oppressive. That's when we saw something that made our hearts stop. At the back of the cave, we found the bodies. They were scattered haphazardly, as if they had been thrown there. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and their faces were frozen in expressions of terror. It was clear they were other explorers, victims of the same malevolent force now pursuing us. "My God," Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. I felt a lump in my throat, fear transforming into deep, paralyzing dread. The sight of those bodies brutally reminded us of the reality of the danger we faced. We knew we couldn't stay there long. The witch could find us at any moment. Trying not to make noise, we backed away from the bodies and returned to the cave entrance, hearts heavy and minds consumed by terror. There was still hope of escape, but we needed to be quick and smart. As we looked into the darkness of the forest outside, we knew the real test of survival was just beginning. After our terrifying experience in the cave, Lucas and I tried to find a way out of the forest. We were exhausted, but the fear of the witch drove us to keep going. The darkness seemed to grow more impenetrable, and the feeling of being watched never went away. Suddenly, a sense of panic overtook me when we heard the witch's whispers and footsteps again. She was following us. I could feel her presence closing in, and the forest seemed to close around us. Despair took over both Lucas and me, even as he tried to remain calm despite the growing sense of danger. The witch appeared before us, a horrifying figure that seemed to be made of nightmares. Lucas tried to run, but the witch was faster. I watched in horror as she seized Lucas with brutal strength. His screams were muffled by the witch's cold and cruel voice, and he fell to the ground, struggling in vain. It was an indescribable moment of terror, and I could do nothing but watch the horrific scene. The horror of the moment paralyzed me for a moment. When I finally managed to move, the witch was too far away for me to intervene. Panic and sadness drove me back into the forest. I tried to flee, but the witch was even more determined to catch me. With every step, fear consumed me further, and the terrain seemed more treacherous. In the chaos, I stumbled and fell into a hole. The fall was long, and I slid down a slippery, damp tunnel until I landed in an underground river. The water was cold and icy, but I managed to stay afloat. The current carried me out of the hole, and I swam desperately until I reached the shore. The forest still felt like a maze, but I was determined to find a way out. The river's current guided me to a path, and with a heavy heart and a mind full of terror, I followed the uneven terrain. The sense of being finally out of the witch's sight was a relief, although the sadness of losing Lucas weighed heavily on me. Eventually, I found a path that led me out of the forest. When I emerged from the darkness, I made my way back to the city. The story I told was met with disbelief and horror, but the truth was undeniable. Lucas was never seen again. His disappearance became a local legend, and the forest continued to haunt the city with its mysteries and terrors. The witch remained a sinister shadow, and Lucas's fate became part of the grim enigma surrounding that cursed place.